I never thought I would end up in a courtroom over a $20 can of Icer, but when you live in a neighborhood controlled by an HOA run by someone like Patricia Hendricks, stranger things happen daily. It started on a Tuesday morning in February, when I woke up to find my entire driveway covered in a thick sheet of ice. The storm had rolled through Rochester, Minnesota overnight, leaving everything coated in that treacherous mix of freezing rain and sleet that makes even walking to your mailbox feel like an extreme sport. I worked from home as a software developer, but I still needed to get my car out later that day for a dentist appointment I had been putting off for months. I threw on my boots and heavy jacket, grabbed my keys, and headed out to the detached garage behind my house. The cold hit me like a wall, and I could already see my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. My neighbor, Tim, was already out trying to chip away at the ice on his driveway with a shovel, making almost no progress. I waved at him as I carefully made my way across my yard, which had turned into an ice rink overnight. When I opened my garage door, something felt immediately wrong. The overhead light flickered on, and I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what was different. Then it hit me. The industrial-sized can of Icer I had purchased just 3 days ago from the hardware store was gone. I had placed it right next to my toolbox on the metal shelf along the wall, and now there was just an empty space where it should have been. I walked around my garage, thinking maybe I had moved it and forgotten. But no, it was definitely gone. That can had cost me nearly $40 because I had bought the commercial-grade stuff that actually worked in temperatures below zero. I checked my car, thinking maybe I had thrown it in the trunk, but nothing. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone broken in? But the door showed no signs of forced entry and nothing else was missing. My tools were all there. My expensive power drill, even the cash I kept in an old coffee can for emergencies. That is when I remembered the security camera. 6 months ago, after someone had stolen packages from my front porch, I had installed a comprehensive security system with cameras covering my front door, driveway, and garage entrance. I had mounted a small camera above the garage door that captured anyone coming or going. I rarely checked the footage unless something seemed off, but this definitely qualified. I went back inside, stomped the ice off my boots, and fired up my laptop. The security system had an app that let me review footage from any of my cameras. I scrolled back to the previous evening around the time the storm had started. For a while, nothing unusual appeared. Just wind-blowing snow and ice across the frame, the occasional car passing on the street behind my property. Then, at 8:37 p.m., I saw movement. A figure approached my garage, hunched against the wind and wearing a dark, puffy jacket with the hood pulled up. At first, I could not tell who it was. The person looked around nervously, then tried the side door of my garage. I always kept that door locked, but to my horror, I watched as the person produced a key and unlocked it. A key? How did they have a key? The figure disappeared inside for about 3 minutes. When they emerged, they were carrying my can of Icer, clutching it against their chest like they had just pulled off a bank heist. As the person turned to leave, the wind caught their hood and pulled it back for just a moment. The motion-activated light above my garage illuminated their face perfectly. Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president. I sat back in my chair, absolutely stunned. Patricia was a 52-year-old woman who had appointed herself the neighborhood guardian, the enforcer of every petty rule in our HOA handbook. She had been president for 4 years, running unopposed because nobody else wanted the headache. She lived 3 houses down from me in a pristine white colonial that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Her lawn was always perfect, her shutters always aligned, her mailbox always polished. She was also the biggest pain in my neck since I had moved into this neighborhood 2 years ago. She had sent me violation notices for leaving my trash cans out 30 minutes too long, for having a small oil stain on my driveway, for planting flowers that were not on the approved vegetation list, and for parking my car on the street overnight when I had guests. Every interaction with her felt like being called to the principal's office, but stealing. This was a whole new level. I watched the footage 3 more times, making absolutely sure it was her. There was no doubt. I could see her face clearly in that brief moment when the hood fell back. I could even see the distinctive silver bracelet she always wore jangling on her wrist as she clutched the Icer can. My first instinct was to march down to her house right then and confront her, but something stopped me. Patricia was not the type to admit wrongdoing. She would deny it, twist things around, maybe even accuse me of something worse. I needed to be smart about this. I called the non-emergency police line instead. The dispatcher listened to my story and said she would send an officer out to take a report. About 40 minutes later, Officer Mike Chen showed up at my door. He was a young guy, probably in his late 20s, with a friendly demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I showed him the footage on my laptop. He watched it carefully, taking notes. When the part came where Patricia's face was visible, he let out a low whistle. "That's Patricia Hendricks," he said. "She's called us out to this neighborhood about 20 times in the past year for various code violations and disputes." "Sounds about right," I said. "And you're saying she used a key to enter your garage?" "Yes. I have no idea how she got a key. I certainly never gave her one." Officer Chen thought for a moment. "Do you rent or own?" "I own. Bought the place 2 years ago." Previous owner could have given her a key, maybe for emergencies or when they were out of town. Or, he paused, "Does your HOA have any clause about access to properties for inspections?" My stomach dropped. I pulled up the HOA documents on my computer, the dense packet of rules and regulations I had skimmed when I bought the house. Officer Chen and I read through them together. Sure enough, buried in Section 12, subsection D, there was language about the HOA board having the right to access properties for emergency inspections or to address immediate code violations. "But that doesn't give her the right to just take your property," Officer Chen said firmly. "That's theft, plain and simple. The value might be under $50, which makes it petty theft, but it's still a crime." He asked me to email him a copy of the security footage, which I did immediately. He said he would go talk to Patricia and get her side of the story. I asked if I could come along, but he suggested I stay home. "These situations can escalate quickly, especially in HOA disputes," he explained. "Let me handle the initial contact. I'll come back and update you." After he left, I tried to focus on work, but I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for an update. About an hour later, Officer Chen called me. "Well, that was interesting," he said. "Miss Hendricks initially denied everything. Then when I told her about the security footage, she changed her story. She claims she took the Icer because she needed it for an emergency. She said she slipped on her driveway and was worried about liability if any of the neighbors or mail carrier fell. She said she planned to return it." "That's ridiculous," I said. "She could have knocked on my door and asked. Or she could have driven to the store like a normal person." "I agree. Here's the thing, though. She's refusing to return the Icer. She says she already used all of it on her driveway and sidewalk. The entire can. In one night. That's impossible. That can was industrial-sized. It could have treated 10 driveways." I pointed that out. She got defensive and asked if I was calling her a liar. Then she complained that I was harassing her and threatened to call my supervisor. I felt my blood pressure rising. This was so typical of Patricia. Never admit fault, always play the victim, always threaten consequences for anyone who dared to challenge her. "What are my options?" I asked. "You can press charges for theft." Given the footage and her admission that she took the item, even if she claims she planned to return it, we have enough for petty theft. Or you can take her to small claims court to recover the cost of the Icer plus any damages. Or you can do both. I thought about it. Part of me just wanted to let it go. It was $40. But another part of me, the part that had been dealing with Patricia's petty tyranny for 2 years, wanted to make a stand. "I want to press charges," I said. "Not because of the money, but because she can't just break into people's property and take their stuff. If she gets away with this, what's next?" "I understand," Officer Chen said. "I'll file the report and forward it to the prosecutor's office. They'll decide whether to charge her." Given her lack of cooperation and the clear evidence, I think they will. "You'll probably get a call in the next few days." After we hung up, I felt simultaneously vindicated and anxious. I had never pressed charges against anyone before. I wondered if I was overreacting. But then I thought about all the violation notices, all the petty complaints, all the times Patricia had made my life harder for no good reason. This was not just about Icer. This was about setting a boundary. The next day, I had to deal with the immediate problem of my icy driveway without my Icer. I borrowed some from Tim, who found the whole situation hilarious when I told him what happened. "Patricia stole from you. That's priceless," he said, laughing. "She fined me $50 last month because my grass was a 1/4 inch too tall according to her measurements. I hope they throw the book at her." Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. In a community of only 38 houses, gossip traveled faster than internet speeds. By that evening, I had gotten texts and calls from at least a dozen neighbors. The reactions were mixed. About half were supportive, saying Patricia had been abusing her power for years, and it was about time someone stood up to her. The other half thought I was making a big deal out of nothing, and should just let it go for the sake of neighborhood harmony. One neighbor, Ellen, who lived next door to Patricia, called me with an interesting piece of information. "I don't know if this matters," she said, "but I saw Patricia going into several garages on the street during the storm. I thought it was odd, but I figured maybe she was checking for damage or something official. But now I'm wondering if she was looking for Icer or other supplies." "Did you see which houses?" I asked. "Definitely yours. And I think she went into the Johnsons' garage across the street, maybe 1 or 2 others. It was hard to see with all the snow." This was getting more interesting. I called Officer Chen and told him what Ellen had seen. He said he would follow up with the other homeowners to see if anything else had gone missing. 3 days later, I got a call from the county prosecutor's office. A woman named Jennifer Larson introduced herself as the assistant prosecutor handling misdemeanor cases. "I've reviewed the evidence in your case against Patricia Hendricks," she said. "The security footage is very clear, and combined with Officer Chen's report and her admission that she took the item, we have a strong case. I'm going to file formal charges of petty theft. What happens next?" I asked. "She'll be formally charged and given a court date. Since it's a misdemeanor, she won't be arrested unless she fails to appear. She'll probably get a summons in the mail. The case will be heard in district court. You'll need to testify about what happened and present your evidence." Given the circumstances, I expect she'll either plead guilty and pay restitution, or we'll have a short trial. "How long does this usually take?" "Depends on the court schedule and whether she pleads guilty. Could be a few weeks, could be a couple of months." After I hung up, I felt the weight of what I had set in motion. Patricia was going to have a criminal record because of me. But then, I reminded myself that she had a criminal record because of her own choices. I had not made her steal from me. I had not made her lie about it. I had not made her refuse to return what she took or apologize. Those were all her decisions. The following week, the HOA had its monthly meeting. These meetings were usually sparsely attended, with just Patricia and maybe 3 or 4 other residents showing up to discuss boring administrative matters like landscaping contracts and snow removal services. This time, nearly every house in the neighborhood sent a representative. I walked into the community center conference room where we held the meetings and felt the tension immediately. Patricia was already there, sitting at the head table with her perfect posture and a tight smile. When she saw me, her expression turned icy. "Well, if it isn't our newest resident who apparently doesn't understand the concept of community cooperation," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. I did not take the bait. I just sat down in one of the folding chairs near the back. Tim sat next to me and gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia called the meeting to order and started going through the usual agenda items, acting as if nothing was wrong. But about 15 minutes in, Jerry, one of the older residents who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, raised his hand. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room," Jerry said. "Patricia, is it true that you're being charged with theft?" The room went dead silent. Patricia's face flushed red. "That is a personal legal matter that has nothing to do with HOA business," she said stiffly. "I disagree," Jerry continued. "You're the president of our HOA. You represent all of us. If you're using your position and access to properties to steal from residents, that's absolutely HOA business." Several people nodded in agreement. I could see Patricia's carefully maintained composure starting to crack. "I did not steal anything," she said, her voice rising. "I borrowed a can of Icer during a storm emergency to prevent injuries on my property. I fully intended to replace it. This has been blown completely out of proportion by someone who moved here 2 years ago and has done nothing but cause problems." "That's not true," I said, standing up. I had not planned to speak, but I could not let her twist the narrative like that. "You entered my garage without permission using a key I never gave you. You took my property without asking. When the police gave you the chance to return it or apologize, you refused. You used it all up and offered nothing in return. That's not borrowing, that's stealing. I have the right to access properties for HOA inspections," Patricia shot back. "It's in the bylaws. For inspections," I said. "Not for taking whatever you want, and definitely not in the middle of the night during a storm without notifying the homeowner." The meeting devolved into chaos after that, with multiple people talking over each other. Some residents defended Patricia, saying I should have just let it go. Others called for her resignation as HOA president. A few people were just confused about what had actually happened. Finally, Ellen stood up and shared what she had seen about Patricia entering multiple garages during the storm. This sparked another round of heated discussion as other residents checked their garages to see if anything was missing from their property. The Johnsons, a young couple with 2 kids, discovered that their bag of rock salt had disappeared from their garage. They had assumed they had used it all earlier in the winter, but now they were not sure. Another neighbor, Frank, realized his snow shovel was gone, though he admitted he might have just misplaced it. By the end of the meeting, a motion was made and passed to have an emergency election for HOA president. Patricia would remain in the position until the election, but her access to all properties was immediately revoked, and her keys had to be turned in to Jerry, who was appointed temporary secretary. Patricia stood up, grabbed her purse, and stormed out without another word. As she left, she shot me a look that made it clear she blamed me for everything. Over the next few weeks, my life became uncomfortable in ways I had not anticipated. I started noticing that my trash cans would be knocked over mysteriously. Someone left a note on my car saying I was a snitch and ruining the neighborhood. A few of Patricia's friends stopped speaking to me entirely, turning away when they saw me outside. But there were positive changes, too. The emergency HOA election brought in a new president, a retired teacher named Dorothy, who actually seemed reasonable and interested in making the neighborhood a better place, rather than just enforcing rules for the sake of rules. She immediately started reviewing the HOA bylaws to remove some of the more ridiculous restrictions Patricia had added over the years. In early April, I got a notice in the mail about Patricia's court date. It was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the county district court. Jennifer Larson, the prosecutor, called me a few days before to prepare me for what would happen. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, she told me. They offered to pay restitution of $40 plus court costs in exchange for dropping the charges. I told them we would accept that if Patricia also issued a formal apology to you and acknowledged what she did was wrong. They refused. So we're going to trial. Looks that way. It's not really a trial in the traditional sense. For petty theft, it'll be a bench trial, meaning just the judge decides. No jury. It should be pretty straightforward. You'll testify, I'll present the security footage and the police report, and then the judge will make a ruling. Will Patricia testify? She has the right to, but I doubt her lawyer will let her. She tends to make things worse for herself when she talks, based on what I've seen in the discovery materials. The morning of the court date, I put on my best suit and drove to the county courthouse in downtown Rochester. It was an imposing stone building with lots of marble and wood paneling that made everything feel very official and serious. I had never been inside a courtroom before, and despite knowing I was in the right, I felt nervous. Jennifer met me in the hallway outside the courtroom and walked me through what would happen. Patricia arrived with her lawyer about 10 minutes before we were scheduled to start. Her lawyer was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Patricia did not look at me or acknowledge my presence. When we entered the courtroom, I was struck by how much smaller and less dramatic it was than courtrooms on television. There were a few rows of benches for spectators, a judge's bench at the front, and tables for the prosecution and defense. The walls were plain, and the whole room had a utilitarian feel. Judge Richard Morrison entered, and we all stood. He was an older man with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He had the look of someone who had seen every variation of human behavior and was not easily impressed or shocked. "This is the matter of state versus Patricia Hendricks, petty theft," he announced. "Counselors, are we ready to proceed?" Both Jennifer and Patricia's lawyer confirmed they were ready. Judge Morrison looked at Patricia's lawyer. "Mr. Brennan, I understand there were plea negotiations that broke down. Would your client like to reconsider before we proceed?" Mr. Brennan, Patricia's lawyer, consulted with her briefly. She shook her head firmly. "No, Your Honor. Miss Hendricks maintains that this is a misunderstanding and that the charges should be dismissed." "Very well. Miss Larson, call your first witness." Jennifer called me to the stand. I was sworn in, promising to tell the truth, and then sat down. Jennifer asked me to explain what happened, starting with the morning I discovered the Icer was missing. I walked through the whole story, trying to be as clear and factual as possible. When I got to the part about reviewing the security footage, Jennifer introduced the video as evidence. The courtroom had a screen and we played the footage. Watching it again, even I had to admit it was damning. You could clearly see Patricia approaching my garage, letting herself in with a key and emerging with the de-icer can. And that moment when her hood fell back and her face was visible, there was absolutely no doubt about who it was. Judge Morrison watched intently, occasionally making notes. When the video finished, he asked if he could see it again. We played it a second time. After I finished my testimony, Mr. Brennan had the opportunity to cross-examine me. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Mr. Harper, you testified that you never gave my client permission to enter your garage, correct?" "Correct. But you were aware that the HOA has provisions allowing board members to access properties for inspections." "I was aware of that provision, yes. But I don't believe it gives the HOA the right to enter whenever they want without notice or to take personal property." "Did you have any signs posted saying the garage was off limits or that surveillance was in use?" "I have a small security camera sign near my front door, but I don't have one specifically on the garage." So my client had no way of knowing she was being recorded. Whether or not she knew she was being recorded doesn't change the fact that she took something that didn't belong to her. Judge Morrison interrupted. "Mr. Brennan, where are you going with this? The legality of the recording is not in question here. This is not an expectation of privacy issue. The garage door faces a public alleyway." "I'm establishing the circumstances, Your Honor." "Established. Move on." Mr. Brennan asked me a few more questions, trying to establish that I had some kind of grudge against Patricia because of previous HOA violations, which I did not deny. Then he sat down. Jennifer called Officer Chen as the next witness. He testified about responding to my call, viewing the footage, and his interaction with Patricia when he went to speak with her. He confirmed that Patricia had admitted taking the de-icer but claimed it was an emergency and that she intended to return it. "Did she in fact return it?" Jennifer asked. "No. She claimed she had used the entire can and had nothing to return." "In your experience, is it plausible that someone would use an entire industrial-sized can of de-icer in one night on a single property?" "I would say that's unlikely. Those cans are designed to cover large commercial areas. A single residential driveway and walkway would require a fraction of that." Mr. Brennan tried to poke holes in Officer Chen's testimony, suggesting that he could not really know how much de-icer someone might need depending on the conditions, but it was not very effective. Officer Chen remained professional and stuck to the facts. After Officer Chen stepped down, Jennifer rested the prosecution's case. Judge Morrison looked at Mr. Brennan. "Does the defense wish to present any witnesses?" Mr. Brennan consulted with Patricia again. This time, their conversation was more heated. I could see Patricia insisting on something while her lawyer tried to talk her out of it. Finally, Mr. Brennan stood up. "Your Honor, Miss Hendricks would like to testify on her own behalf." I saw Jennifer suppress a smile. Apparently, this was good news for our side. Patricia took the stand and was sworn in. She looked composed and confident, sitting up very straight with her hands folded in her lap. Mr. Brennan started with friendly questions, letting her explain her version of events. According to Patricia, the night of the storm had been incredibly dangerous. She had slipped on her own driveway earlier in the evening and nearly injured herself seriously. She had used all of her own de-icer and rock salt and was genuinely worried that someone could get hurt. The stores were all closed because of the storm. She remembered that the previous owner of my house had given her a spare key years ago in case of emergencies, specifically so she could check on the property when they were traveling. "I made a judgment call," Patricia said. "I knew that if someone fell on my property, I could be liable. I also knew that, as HOA president, I had a responsibility to ensure the safety of the neighborhood. I saw this as an emergency situation that fell within my authority. "Why didn't you knock on Mr. Harper's door and ask for the de-icer?" Mr. Brennan asked. "It was late at night during a dangerous storm. I didn't want to disturb him. I planned to leave him a note explaining what I had done and offering to replace the can, but in the chaos of dealing with the ice, I forgot. It was an oversight on my part, but certainly not theft." When Mr. Brennan finished his questions, Jennifer stood up for cross-examination. This was the part I had been waiting for. "Miss Hendricks, you testified that you nearly injured yourself slipping on ice earlier that evening, correct?" "Yes." "What time was that?" "Around 7 p.m. "And when did you enter Mr. Harper's garage?" "I believe it was around 8:30. "So you're telling the court that at 7 p.m. you slipped on ice and were so concerned about safety that you took Mr. Harper's de-icer 90 minutes later. What were you doing during that 90 minutes? Patricia hesitated. "I was dealing with the immediate situation, cleaning up. I had to change my clothes because I had fallen." "Did you call anyone during that time? The fire department, the police, any emergency services?" "No, I didn't feel that was necessary." "Did you call any of your neighbors to see if they had spare de-icer you could borrow?" "It was late and the storm was severe. I didn't want to bother anyone." "But you did bother Mr. Harper, didn't you? You entered his property without permission." "I had a key and authority under the HOA bylaws." "Let's talk about that key. You said the previous owner gave it to you." "When was that?" "I'm not sure exactly. Several years ago." "And when Mr. Harper bought the house 2 years ago, did you tell him you had a key to his garage?" "I don't recall. It may have come up." "It may have come up. That seems like something you would remember." "Did you or did you not tell Mr. Harper that you had a key to his garage?" "I don't believe I did specifically mention it, no." "So Mr. Harper had no idea you could access his garage at will?" "The HOA bylaws clearly state, Your Honor, I would like to introduce HOA bylaw section 12, subsection D into evidence," Jennifer interrupted. She pulled out a copy of the bylaws and read aloud. "The HOA board may conduct inspections of properties with 72 hours advance written notice to the homeowner, except in cases of emergency where there is imminent threat to health or safety of other residents." She looked back at Patricia. "Miss Hendricks, did you provide Mr. Harper with 72 hours advance written notice?" "No, but as I said, this was an emergency." "An emergency that took you 90 minutes to address after allegedly injuring yourself. An emergency where you did not call any actual emergency services. An emergency where you took an industrial-sized can of de-icer worth $40 and, by your own admission, used the entire thing in one night. Is that correct?" I needed to be thorough. "Miss Hendricks, do you have any receipts or proof that you used all of that de-icer on your property?" "No, I don't keep receipts for something like that." "Did any of your neighbors see you applying this massive amount of de-icer to your property?" "I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to who might be watching." "Isn't it true that you took Mr. Harper's de-icer because you ran out of your own and the stores were closed? And rather than waiting until morning or asking for help, you decided to simply help yourself to someone else's property?" "That's not how it happened." "Isn't it also true that Mr. Harper has received numerous violation notices from you over the past 2 years for minor infractions? Mr. Harper has been the subject of several legitimate code violations." "Yes." "And isn't it true that you've had disputes with him about HOA rules and your enforcement of them?" "We have had disagreements, like I have with many residents." Jennifer pulled out a folder. "I have copies of violation notices you sent to Mr. Harper." "Let's see. One for trash cans left out 30 minutes past the designated time. One for an oil stain on his driveway. one for unapproved flowers, one for parking on the street overnight. Would you say you pay particular attention to Mr. Harper's property? I pay attention to all properties equally. Really? Because I have the records of all violation notices you issued over the past 2 years. Mr. Harper received 14 notices. The next highest resident received 4. Would you like to explain that discrepancy? Patricia's composure was finally starting to crack. Her face was flushed, and she was gripping the edge of the witness stand. Mr. Harper's property has required more attention because he fails to follow the rules. Or perhaps you've been targeting him because he questions your authority, and when you saw an opportunity during the storm to take something from his property under the guise of emergency access, you took it. Isn't that the truth? No, that's not true at all. You didn't return the Icer or offer to replace it even when the police gave you the opportunity, did you? I told the officer I had already used it. You could have offered to pay for a replacement. You could have apologized. You could have done a lot of things, but instead you refused to cooperate. Why is that, Miss Hendricks? I don't believe I did anything wrong. Nothing wrong. You entered someone's private property without their knowledge, took their belongings, and refused to make it right. And you still don't think you did anything wrong? Mr. Brennan objected, saying Jennifer was badgering the witness. Judge Morrison sustained the objection, but the damage was already done. Patricia looked rattled and defensive. Jennifer had no further questions. Mr. Brennan tried to do some damage control on redirect, having Patricia reiterate that she believed she was acting within her authority and that it was all just a misunderstanding. But it was clear that Patricia's testimony had not helped her case. After Patricia stepped down, both lawyers gave brief closing arguments. Mr. Brennan argued that this was an honest misunderstanding by a community volunteer trying to prevent injuries during a storm. Jennifer argued that the evidence clearly showed Patricia had stolen property, lied about her intentions, and refused to make restitution when given the chance. Judge Morrison said he would take a brief recess to review the evidence and then issue his ruling. We all stood as he left the courtroom. During the recess, I went out into the hallway with Jennifer. How do you think it went? I asked. I think it went well. Her testimony really hurt her case. She came across as entitled and unwilling to take responsibility. The judge seemed skeptical of her emergency claims. 20 minutes later, we were called back into the courtroom. Judge Morrison returned and everyone stood until he was seated. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony in this case, he began. The facts are not really in dispute. Miss Hendricks entered Mr. Harper's property using a key she obtained from a previous owner. She took a can of Icer belonging to Mr. Harper without his permission or knowledge. She did not leave a note or any indication of what she had done. When confronted by police, she admitted taking the item but refused to return it or offer restitution. He paused and looked directly at Patricia. Miss Hendricks, I appreciate that you volunteer your time as HOA president. That's a thankless job, and I'm sure you have good intentions much of the time. However, good intentions do not give you the right to enter someone's property and take their belongings without permission. Your claim that this fell under HOA Emergency Inspection Authority is not supported by the bylaws, which require either advance notice or a genuine emergency threatening other residents. Your slip on your own driveway, while unfortunate, does not meet that threshold. Patricia's jaw was clenched, and I could see she was fighting to keep her composure. The security footage clearly shows you entering the garage and taking the Icer. Your testimony that you intended to leave a note is not credible, given that you had 90 minutes between your alleged fall and taking the Icer, plenty of time to knock on Mr. Harper's door or make other arrangements. Your refusal to return the item or offer compensation when given the opportunity shows a lack of respect for Mr. Harper's property rights. Judge Morrison flipped through some papers on his desk. I find you guilty of petty theft. I'm sentencing you to pay restitution of $40 to Mr. Harper for the cost of the Icer. Additionally, you are fined $300. You will also complete 20 hours of community service. Finally, I'm ordering you to return any and all keys you possess that provide access to Mr. Harper's property or any other property in your neighborhood, unless the current owner has specifically authorized you to have such access in writing. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she just shook her head. "You understand the sentence?" Judge Morrison asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said quietly. "You have the right to appeal this decision within 30 days if you wish. This court is adjourned." We all stood as the judge left. Patricia and her lawyer quickly gathered their things and left without looking at anyone. Jennifer shook my hand and congratulated me. "Justice served," she said. "She'll probably appeal, but honestly, I doubt she'll get anywhere with it. The evidence was too strong." I walked out of the courthouse feeling a strange mix of emotions. I had won. Patricia had been held accountable, but I did not feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Mainly, I just felt tired and ready for this whole thing to be over. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal in the neighborhood. Patricia paid the restitution and the fine, though she did it through her lawyer rather than face me directly. She completed her community service hours at a local food bank, which I only knew because another neighbor mentioned seeing her there. The new HOA president, Dorothy, was a breath of fresh air. She established clear guidelines for property access, requiring written permission from homeowners except in genuine emergencies, which were defined specifically. She also implemented a system where any HOA violation notices had to be reviewed and approved by 2 board members before being sent out, preventing anyone from targeting individual residents. Patricia remained in the neighborhood but kept a much lower profile. She resigned as HOA president after the conviction, which was probably for the best. I occasionally saw her outside working in her yard, and we would acknowledge each other with a brief nod, nothing more. The hostility seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a cold indifference that was honestly preferable. Some of the neighbors who had been upset with me for pressing charges eventually came around, especially after Dorothy started making positive changes to the HOA. They realized that Patricia's authoritarian approach had been holding the community back. A few people even apologized to me for their initial reactions. Tim, my neighbor who had lent me the Icer that first morning, became a good friend through all of this. We started having weekly poker nights with a few other neighbors, and it helped build a real sense of community that had been missing when everyone was too worried about HOA violations to actually get to know each other. The incident taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, even when it seems easier to just let things go. If I had ignored the theft, Patricia would have continued abusing her authority, and other residents would have continued suffering under her petty tyranny. By holding her accountable, even over something as small as a can of Icer, I helped create positive change for the entire neighborhood. It also taught me the importance of security cameras. That footage was crucial in proving what happened and protecting myself from false accusations. Without it, the case would have been my word against Patricia's, and given her position of authority in the HOA, I might not have been believed. About 3 months after the court case, I was working in my garage when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned around to find Patricia standing at the entrance, looking uncomfortable. "You have a minute?" she asked. Sure, I said, putting down the wrench I was holding. She took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize for everything. Taking your de-icer, the way I handled it afterward, all the violation notices I sent you over the years. You were right. I was out of line. I let the little bit of power I had as HOA president go to my head, and I started seeing people as problems to fix rather than neighbors to live with. I was genuinely surprised. This was not what I had expected from Patricia. I appreciate you saying that, I said. I've been doing some therapy since all this happened, she continued. Turns out I have some control issues I need to work on. The therapist thinks it stems from feeling like my life was chaotic, so I tried to control everything around me to compensate. Not that that excuses anything I did. We all have our issues, I said. I'm sorry things went as far as they did. I didn't want to see you charged with a crime, but I also couldn't let it slide. No, you were right to hold me accountable. That's what I've been learning. People need boundaries, and I had been crossing them all over the place. So I wanted to apologize and to thank you in a weird way. This whole mess has actually helped me become more self-aware. She held out her hand. I shook it. Clean slate, she asked. Clean slate, I agreed. After she left, I stood in my garage for a few minutes processing what had just happened. Growth and change are possible, even for people who seem set in their ways. Patricia's apology felt genuine, and I respected her for making the effort to reflect and improve. Life in the neighborhood continued to improve. Dorothy organized community events like block parties and yard sales, things that brought people together rather than driving them apart. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, a tool for maintaining common areas and handling collective issues, rather than a mechanism for one person to impose their will on everyone else. I replaced my de-icer, this time getting an even bigger can and keeping it in my locked basement storage rather than the garage. Call it an abundance of caution, but after everything that happened, I was not taking any chances. The security camera footage that had captured Patricia's theft got mentioned in a local news story about HOA disputes, though they did not use anyone's names. Suddenly, several neighbors who had previously thought I was being paranoid started installing their own security systems. There is something about seeing crime happen in your own neighborhood that makes you realize how vulnerable you can be. One interesting development came a few months after the court case, when the HOA board reviewed all of Patricia's previous violation notices. They found that about 30% of them were for infractions that either did not exist in the bylaws or were so minor that they should have been handled with a friendly conversation rather than a formal notice. They voided several fines that had been assessed and issued refunds. I got back $150 from 3 different violations that turned out to be bogus. This prompted the board to completely rewrite the HOA handbook, making it clearer and more reasonable. They removed outdated rules that no longer made sense and added processes for disputing violations. They also implemented term limits for board positions, ensuring that no one could hold power indefinitely. In a strange way, Patricia's theft of my de-icer became a catalyst for positive change throughout the entire community. It exposed problems that had been festering for years and forced everyone to confront them. If she had just asked to borrow the de-icer, or even if she had left a note and offered to replace it, none of this would have happened. But her sense of entitlement and her refusal to admit wrongdoing set off a chain of events that ultimately made things better for everyone. I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing to do. Standing up to Patricia was not easy, especially when some neighbors thought I was being petty. Going through the court process was stressful and time-consuming. But in the end, It was worth it because it established important boundaries and protected everyone's rights. The story also reminded me why I value living in a country with a functioning legal system. I was able to present evidence, have my case heard fairly, and see justice done. The system worked the way it was supposed to work. Nobody was above the rules, not even someone in a position of authority like the HOA president. As time went on, Patricia and I never became friends, but we developed a mutual respect. We would chat occasionally when we ran into each other, usually about neutral topics like the weather or upcoming neighborhood events. She seemed genuinely happier after stepping down from the HOA presidency, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She started taking painting classes and actually created some beautiful watercolor landscapes. She displayed one at a neighborhood art show Dorothy organized, and several people were impressed enough to commission pieces. It turned out that when Patricia was not consumed with enforcing rules and maintaining control, she had creative talents she had been neglecting. The incident also changed how I viewed conflict. Before all this happened, I tended to avoid confrontation whenever possible. I would let small annoyances slide and swallow my frustration, rather than addressing problems directly. But dealing with Patricia taught me that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it is uncomfortable. Not every battle is worth fighting, but some definitely are, and learning to tell the difference is an important life skill. My relationship with the other neighbors deepened as well. Going through a challenging situation together created bonds that might not have formed otherwise. Tim, Ellen, Jerry, and several others became genuine friends rather than just people I waved to occasionally. We looked out for each other, borrowed tools and supplies, and actually built the kind of community that HOAs are supposed to facilitate but often prevent. About a year after the court case, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I had not been planning to get involved, but several neighbors encouraged me to run, saying they valued my willingness to stand up for what was right. I agreed to serve a 2-year term, focused on maintaining the positive changes Dorothy had started. One of my first acts as a board member was to propose and pass a measure requiring the HOA to carry proper liability insurance. If Patricia had injured herself on her property because of ice, she should have filed a claim with her homeowner's insurance, not stolen the Icer from a neighbor. Having clear insurance policies in place would prevent future board members from feeling like they had to take extreme measures during emergencies. We also created a community emergency supply system. Neighbors could voluntarily contribute items like extra de-icer, rock salt, sandbags, generators, and other supplies to a shared storage unit. During emergencies, anyone who needed these items could access them. It addressed the legitimate concern Patricia had raised about being unable to get supplies during the storm, but in a way that respected everyone's property rights and built community cooperation. Looking back on the whole experience, I am glad I pressed charges against Patricia. It was not about revenge or punishment. It was about accountability and making sure that positions of authority could not be abused. The $40 worth of de-icer was never really the point. The point was establishing that rules apply to everyone, especially those in charge. The court case had ripple effects beyond just our neighborhood. Other HOA boards in the area heard about what happened and reviewed their own access policies. Several made changes to prevent similar abuses. A few local lawyers started offering seminars on HOA law for both board members and residents, helping everyone understand their rights and responsibilities. I also learned to be more careful about security and property access. I changed all the locks on my house and garage when I first moved in, but I should have asked the previous owners about who they had given keys to. That oversight allowed Patricia to have access she should not have had. Now I am meticulous about key control and access logs. The security camera system proved to be one of the best investments I ever made. Beyond catching Patricia in the act, it provided peace of mind and deterred other potential problems. I upgraded the system after the incident, adding more cameras and cloud backup storage. Several neighbors did the same, and the entire neighborhood became more secure as a result. One unexpected benefit of the whole situation was that it made me more aware of legal issues and property rights. I spent time reading the HOA bylaws thoroughly, something I should have done when I first moved in. I also researched Minnesota property law and learned about my rights as a homeowner. Knowledge is power, and having that legal foundation made me better equipped to protect myself and help other neighbors who had questions. The community service that Patricia was required to complete ended up being meaningful for her. She got involved with the food bank where she did her hours and continued volunteering there even after her sentence was complete. She told me once that helping people who had real problems put her own life in perspective and made her realize how petty she had been about things like grass height and mailbox polish. As for the Icer itself, I still have the replacement can I bought. Every winter when I see it on the shelf in my basement, it reminds me of the whole crazy series of events. A $40 can of Icer led to police reports, court appearances, an HOA shakeup, new friendships, and ultimately a better neighborhood for everyone. Life is strange sometimes. The story of Patricia and the Icer became something of a legend in our neighborhood. New residents who moved in would inevitably hear about it from the old-timers, usually with various embellishments added over time. Some versions had Patricia trying to steal from multiple garages in one night. Others had me chasing her down the street. The truth was mundane compared to some of the stories, but that did not stop people from enjoying the tale. What started as a frustrating discovery on a cold February morning turned into a journey through the legal system, community politics, and personal growth for multiple people. It demonstrated that small actions can have large consequences, and that standing up for your rights matters, even when the stakes seem trivial. The relationship between Patricia and me evolved from antagonistic to coldly neutral to eventually respectful. We were never going to be best friends, but we found a way to coexist peacefully in the same small neighborhood. She learned to respect boundaries, and I learned that people are capable of change when they are willing to do the work. The new HOA structure continues to function well. Dorothy served 2 terms as president before passing the torch to Jerry, who has maintained the same philosophy of community cooperation over authoritarian control. Board meetings are still sparsely attended, but that is because there is less drama and fewer complaints. People trust that the board is working in their best interests rather than pursuing personal agendas. My time on the HOA board taught me a lot about governance and the challenges of trying to create rules that work for everyone. It is not easy to balance individual freedom with community standards, to know when to enforce rules strictly and when to show flexibility. I gained appreciation for the difficulty of the role, even as I remained committed to preventing the kind of overreach that Patricia had engaged in. The incident also affected how I approach conflict in other areas of my life. At work, I became more willing to speak up when I disagreed with decisions or saw problems. In my personal relationships, I got better at addressing issues directly rather than letting resentment build. The experience of standing up to Patricia, despite social pressure to just let it go, gave me confidence that carried over into other situations. 3 years after the theft, I ran into Patricia at a local coffee shop. We ended up sitting together and having a surprisingly pleasant conversation about life, work, and the neighborhood. She told me she was planning to move to Florida to be closer to her daughter and grandchildren. "I'm ready for a fresh start," she said. "I've made peace with what happened, but I think I'll be happier somewhere where I'm not the woman who got convicted of stealing the Icer. You know how these stories stick around in small communities." I understood what she meant. Despite her apology and growth, there would always be neighbors who remembered her as the tyrannical HOA president. Moving away would give her the chance to be someone new. "I hope Florida treats you well," I said sincerely. "Thank you. And thank you for accepting my apology way back when." "You didn't have to do that, but it meant a lot." We shook hands one final time, and that was the last I saw of Patricia Hendricks. I heard later that she sold her house and moved in the spring. A young family with twin toddlers bought the place, and they have been wonderful neighbors. The story continues to shape life in our neighborhood in subtle ways. New board members are carefully vetted to make sure they understand the importance of respecting property rights. The bylaws are reviewed annually and updated as needed. Residents feel empowered to question decisions and push back against overreach. The whole community learned valuable lessons from one woman's bad decision on a stormy night. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not had that security camera, if I had not pressed charges, if I had just let the whole thing go. Patricia might still be running the HOA with an iron fist. Other neighbors might still be suffering under pointless violation notices. The community might still be fractured by fear of authority rather than united by mutual respect. Instead, we have a neighborhood that functions well, where people look out for each other, where rules serve the community rather than controlling it. We have block parties and poker nights and shared emergency supplies. We have an HOA that actually makes life better rather than worse. All because I refuse to let someone steal a $40 can of Icer and get away with it. Sometimes the smallest acts of standing up for what is right can create the biggest changes. That is the real lesson I took away from this whole experience. Your voice matters. Your property rights matter. Your willingness to hold people accountable matters. The legal system worked exactly as it should have. Evidence was presented, truth was determined, justice was served, and everyone moved forward. It restored my faith in institutions that often seem broken or ineffective. When used properly, the tools we have for resolving disputes and enforcing standards actually work. Now, years later, I live in a peaceful neighborhood with good neighbors and a functional HOA. My garage stays locked, my security cameras stay running, and my Icer stays safely in my basement. I serve on the HOA board and try to apply the lessons I learned about governance, respect, and accountability. Life is good. And every winter, when the first big storm hits and I pull out that can of Icer to treat my driveway, I remember where it all started. I remember the shock of discovering it missing, the validation of having video proof, the nervousness of testifying in court, the satisfaction of seeing justice done, and ultimately the growth that came from standing up for what was right. That is my story about how an HOA president's theft of Icer led to criminal charges, community transformation, and unexpected lessons about courage, accountability, and the importance of protecting your rights. It was not the most dramatic crime in the world, but it mattered. And sometimes, that is enough.